In our first lesson, we are going to be talking about data analysis, making sense of data. So in this section, we have a few learning targets we're going to cover, things we need to make sure that you understand by the time we finish these notes. So I can identify individuals and variables of a set of data. I can define categorical and quantitative variables. I can describe the distribution for a set of data. These are the things you should be able to do by the time we're done with these notes. So to begin, the first thing that we want to do is just understand what is statistics. Okay, so statistics is going to be the science of data. So statistics is essentially just the analysis of data that we get, whether it be from psychology, chemistry, physics, anything, any data we collect, statistics is the study of that data. Data analysis is the process of organizing, displaying, summarizing, and asking questions about data. Okay, so something you're going to notice this first section is a lot of vocab, okay, a lot of things I need you to understand vocabulary-wise, so when we use these terms throughout the course, you understand what we're saying. So, some more definitions for you. Individuals are going to be the objects, which can be people, it can be animals, it can be things. It's whatever is being described by a set of data. Those are the individuals. So let's say I took a survey of our class. You guys would be the individuals of my data, okay? And then variable is any characteristic of an individual. So let's say in the survey I asked you what grade you are, what your favorite food is. All of those things are going to be the variables that I'm measuring. Now, there's two types of variables that we can measure when it comes to collecting data, okay? The first kind is categorical variable. This places an individual into one of several groups or categories, okay? So if I ask you if you're male or female, I ask you if you live in Elk River or Rogers or Zimmerman or Otsego. Okay, so it groups you into a category. Okay, that's categorical variable. Quantitative takes numerical values for which it makes sense to find an average. Okay, so let's say I'm curious about the average wage of a high school student. So I took a survey about what your hourly rate is at your job. That would be categorical data. Okay, and notice it would make sense to take the average of those numbers so I could get the sense of the average wage of kids of our class, okay? So that's going to be the key thing when it comes to categorical, or sorry, to quantitative, is don't just look and see that there's a number and automatically assume that it's quantitative. It's only quantitative if it makes sense to take the average of that number, okay? So we're going to go through a couple of examples here where we're going to have numerical data that is not quantitative. So to help you keep this straight, again, just to reiterate, any variable that is described by words, automatically categorical, okay? So that's not hard to understand. Any words, boom, you know it's categorical. Numbers, we're going to have to do some thinking. So again, here's some examples of numbers that are actually categorical data. Phone numbers. Okay, phone numbers, I mean, they're numbers obviously, but it makes absolutely no sense to find an average of telephone numbers, okay? It has absolutely no meaning. Things like zip code. Is another example. It has absolutely no meaning to try to average your zip code or anything like that, okay? So keep in mind there are examples out there that you want to be careful of that are numerical, however, they are actually categorical data, okay? Now, throughout the notes, something that you're going to notice is I highlight what I call AP exam tips, okay? And I take these straight out of your book. I just want to make sure that I draw your attention to these because these are going to be very important. The author of this textbook is actually a person who writes AP tests. So any tips or hints that our author puts in are going to be worth our while to examine. So if you learn to distinguish categorical from quantitative variables now, it will pay big rewards later. The type of data determines what type of graphs and which numerical summaries are appropriate. You'll be expected to analyze categorical and quantitative data effectively on the AP test, okay? So just practicing this skill now, getting good at this now, it's going to help you later so you can distinguish what types of analyses to run, stuff like that, on specific data when we get to that point in the course. All right, so here is some actual US Census data. All right, so here's information about 10 randomly selected US residents from the 2000 census imported using Fathom software. So just looking at this, it looks like we're keeping track of the state that the person is from, the number of family members they have, their age, gender, marital status, total income, travel time to work. So the first question, who are the individuals? Okay. Now this is tricky, okay? Be careful because you don't want to say the state. It's tempting to put just the first thing you see. Say, oh, well, Kentucky, Florida, Wisconsin, those are the individuals. No, no. Those are not the individuals. The individuals are the 10 randomly selected people from that 2000 census, okay? The state is actually already a description of the person, but you want to be very careful that you're explicit that the individuals themselves are the people, okay? The state is the first thing that categorizes them. All right. So, what variables are being measured? Identify each as categorical or quantitative, and what units were the quantitative variables measured? All right, so the variables. Well, if I look at my table, again, the variables are going to be lining the top up here, okay? The variables are the things that describe the individuals. So, like I said, the state, number of family members, age, gender, marital status, total income, travel time to work. Each of those are going to be the variables that are being measured, okay? So, just like I said, there are all of our variables. Next step is determining which are categorical, which are quantitative, okay? State, I think, is really easy. State is a description in words, so that one clearly going to be categorical, okay? Whenever it's words, you automatically know that it's categorical. Number of family members, what do we think about that? Okay, well, I'm going to say that it's quantitative because I could find the average number of household members of our class, right? I could add them all up, find the average, and say, hey, on average, kids have maybe 3 other family members in our class, okay? So it does make sense to find the average of those values, so we're going to call it quantitative. Age. Same reasoning. If I wanted the average age of the people in this room, again, same thing. I could add up all of our ages, divide up by how many there are, and I would have the average age of our class. Gender is a word description, so this is obviously going to be categorical. Marital status, again, it's a description in words, so it's going to be categorical. Total income is numerical, and again, just like my earlier example of wage, it is quantitative. It could make sense to find the average of what the income is of people in this room. Travel time to work, once again, that is going to be quantitative, okay? We can find the average time it takes people to get to work, or in your case, just get to school. And then, of course, on the AP test, it's always best to be as explicit as possible, as descriptive as possible. So whenever you can, it is always, always a good habit to get used to units, okay? Just putting numbers down is not going to get you full credit on the AP test. So you really have to make sure that if there's units involved, something like that, be as clear and concise as possible. Include those things in any answer that you give. So here, the number of family members, we're talking about number of people. Age, we're talking about number of years. Total income, we're talking about dollars. Travel time to work, we're talking about minutes. Always be as explicit as possible when you are describing something, okay? And that does mean including the units on it. Our next question, describe the individuals that are in the first row. All right, so in the first row, so we're going to be looking at this individual right up here, okay? So what do we know about that person? Well, that person is a 61-year-old female who is married and has two family members. They live in Kentucky. She is married with a total income of $21,000, and it takes her about 20 minutes to get to work. Now, notice it's not essential that I go in order, right? I kind of group some things together to make my explanation kind of flow a little bit better. But notice I hit every single point along those variables, okay? I described absolutely everything about this individual, and I did it in words, okay? That's the biggest thing, is don't make it choppy. When they ask you to describe something, you want to use full sentences, okay? I cannot stress to you how important that is. Any explanation that you want to give me, I don't want one-word answers. I don't want choppy bullets, okay? I want full sentences. I want full answers. A huge piece of this class isn't necessarily the math. It's the communication of the math, communicating what you need me to know. And that takes good English skills, okay? That takes writing skills. So we are going to be practicing a lot of that stuff too, not just the math, but how do we effectively communicate what we know and what we're getting out of the data, okay? All right, next definition, distribution. So distribution tells us what values of a variable takes and how often it takes those values. A variable generally takes on many different values. So for example, for age, we had people in their 60s, we had people in their 50s, people in their 40s. Okay, so those values create a distribution. Okay, now the distribution I showed is of the data we were just looking at, and it's the number of family members. Okay, so what's right below is a dot plot of number of family members for that distribution. Okay, and so that's going to be the focus of a lot of what we do in this chapter, is modeling distributions. How can we show these different distributions? Okay, this is just one type, a dot plot. There's going to be many types that we cover throughout this chapter. All right, how to explore data. Okay, that's kind of the overall theme of everything. How do we explore? How do we analyze data? Well, to begin for this chapter, we're going to be talking about examining each individual or each variable by itself, and then we're going to study the relationships among those variables. How are these variables connected? Does one affect the other? We're going to start with a graph or graphs, plural. Okay, so whenever we're looking at data, if there's a way that we can graphically represent this data, that's something we're going to learn how to do. And then we're going to talk about adding numerical summaries, okay? And again, that depends on what type of data we're looking at. And so I'm going to hold off on showing you an example of that because that's coming later in this chapter. What types of numerical summaries are appropriate for data? So analysis, or from data analysis to inference, because that's kind of the goal here. When we have data, we want to be able to make inferences. We want to make conclusions from our data. So how do statistics work? Okay, what's the big picture of what's happening here? Well, the big picture is we want data on an entire population, right? But we can't always get that. It doesn't make sense, or sometimes just not feasible. So instead, we take a sample. We collect data from that sample, okay? And what do? Well, we perform data analysis on that sample, okay? So we collect our data, we do all of that, and then we look at the data and analyze that data. And what do we use it for? Well, we use it to make inferences about that population that the sample came from, because that's our ultimate goal. And if we sample well, we can make good inferences, accurate inferences about the population. Okay, so that's the big picture of where we're going in this class. It's going to take us a while to get there, but every skill that we're working on are gaining the skills in order to do that inference, okay? And that's going to be our entire second semester, is making inferences on data that we collect. All right, so that is all for our notes today. Thank you for joining me for these, and I look forward to seeing you in class.